Hi everyone, thanks for coming to this session. My name is Cyrine. I am an analyst working at a company called Ampere Analysis, which is a London research company specialized in the media and entertainment business. So, today I'll be talking about commissioning and distribution of children's content. I'll provide an overview of recent trends in the children's content market, in particular with a view to better understand how streaming, and especially subscription video on demand, is shaping market dynamics. I'll be exploring this through different angles. First of all, looking at the commissioning of children's content. How are commissions evolving globally by volume of titles, and what are the underlying trends contributing to this evolution, in particular looking at consumer trends. Then I will be moving on from there to explore the pressures for content to stand out in an increasingly crowded content market, and looking at effective distribution strategies for children's content in this context. But first of all, let me pause to describe a little bit the situation we're currently witnessing in the commissioning of children's content globally. So the team I work in tracks commissions of across all genres by all the main commissioners globally, all the broadcasters, video on demand commissioners, etc. We're talking here about movies and TV series or shows. And what we've noticed is that there has been a decline in global commissions across all genres. This has started towards the end of last year, towards the third quarter. But if we're looking at children's commissioning in particular, we see a steeper decline rate, which in the first quarter of 23 reached around a minus 20% rate, year-on-year growth, year-on-year decline, I mean. And so if we're looking at children's animations in particular, the decline is even steeper, and here in the green line. And even further, if we look at commissioning of new animation projects, the rate is really reaching a minus 40% rate globally, which is really quite a stark decline in commissioning levels of children's animations. So basically, the higher the risk associated with a children's project, so here projects that take longer to develop, like animations, and riskier projects, as in new series as opposed to renewed series, the higher the decline rate. And a lot of this decline is coming from the US market. We see here US kids commissions announced over a 12-year period ending in April this year. And we see that in the US, children's commissions for subscription video on demand services have declined, reaching 87 commissions during the 12-month period, and pay TV has almost halved in volume. And a lot of this is coming from studio-owned commissioners. So the major studios in the US, here we're looking at Comcast, Disney, Paramount, and Warner Brothers Discovery. We see that their commissioning of children's content is falling. We're talking about a minus 40, almost 40% rate for pay TV commissions by these studio-backed groups for their pay TV channels, and over 50% decline rate for their streaming services. Meanwhile, in Europe, we have quite a different situation. We do have a slowdown in commissioning of children's content. Here on the right-hand side, we see that we have started to go into a negative rate in Q1 23, in the first quarter of 23, across all commissions. This is on the back of a first quarter last year, which was already negative. And in particular, we see, when we look at animation projects separately, we see that the first quarter was at quite a low level in volume terms, a level that we haven't seen for quite a while. However, in Western Europe, the situation is nowhere near as stark as in the US market. So let's now try to understand a little bit some of the dynamics going on and why this is happening. There is, of course, a very significant difference in structure between the US market and the Western European market. If we look at the top 10 commissioners of children's content in Europe, they are primarily public service broadcasters. 93% are public service broadcasters, whereas the top 10 commissioners of children's content in the US are predominantly subscription video on demand services and pay TV channels. And this difference is crucial to deciphering the trends that we have just been referring to. So the US market is primarily driven by a subscription model, with pressure to attract new subscribers and retain existing one being the key determinator. And revenues for US pay TV players have continued to decrease. They have done so for over 5 years now. They are forecast to continue to decline. But even in the streaming, subscription video on demand side of things, we see revenues still increasing, but at a far lower rate than before. And we expect the rate of SVOD revenue increase to go down towards a sort of plateau at, and it is forecast to grow by low single digits over the coming years. This means, among others, that there is more pressure on content investments and also on commissioning. Now, let's look back at children's content and how it is performing for the SVOD players in this subscription video, subscription-based market. Looking at some of our Ampere's consumer surveys suggests that there is some evidence that access to children's content may reduce churn rates, so it may help to retain existing subscribers. Here we're looking at data from the US as well as Western Europe, and we have what we call an NPS score, which is a sort of customer satisfaction score with the services that they are subscribing to. And we have found that here in pink, households that have children seem to be far more satisfied with having their subscriptions than customers that have no children. So potentially, access to children's content is helping to retain some of these subscribers. Having said that, of course, another interpretation is that households with children are more generally much happier to have access to a streaming service because they are housebound more than households without children, and possibly they are also very exhausted and just happy to have some level of escapism, speaking from personal experience here. But let's look now at the acquisition of new subscribers, and there we have quite a different story. So amongst the questions we ask in our surveys, we look at the motivations for subscribing to a service, an SVOD service. And we list a number of motivations. Here are some of the key ones, there's 12 of them. They range from access to US movies, to sports content, anything to do with pricing and promotions, but also here in the middle at the top, we see one of the motivations we list in our survey is, I subscribe so that my children have something to watch. And we wanted to see how important is this motivation for people who subscribe to different SVOD services. Unsurprisingly, for Disney Plus and also here YouTube Premium, so content, there's so platforms that are branded mainly around their children's content. This motivation is number one, is one of the key reasons, with over 50% of people saying that this was an important reason for them to subscribe. However, when it comes to pretty much all the other services, access to children's content was ranked at far lower rate. So for Netflix, we're looking at number 8. So having access to the children's content was very low priority for them when it came to subscribing to a service. Similarly for Amazon, we have number 7, Hulu number 8. So what this is pointing to really is that children's content is very distinctive in the way it is consumed compared to other genres. Children are far more attached to content, therefore novelty and catalog renewal matter far less than with other genres of content. They love watching the same content repeatedly. Therefore, content exclusivity, time sensitivity are less important subscription factors. And also, the content informs how they play with their peers, so it's very important for them to have access to widely popular content rather than discovering new shows. Children are also more platform agnostic. And most importantly of all, perhaps, they are not the decision makers when it comes to making subscriptions. They don't hold the purse strings, so to speak. And therefore, this sort of goes some way to explaining why leading US studios have started to really quite drastically cut their commissioning of new children's content and turning more towards an acquisition-driven model. So here in the yellow line, we see the kids' commissions by SVODs over the recent months, whereas in the blue, a bar chart, we see their catalogs of children's content, which are huge. Meanwhile, by comparison, in Western Europe, where public broadcasters are the main commissioners of children's content is much more part of their public remit. And therefore, they provide a lot more stability in commissioning of children's shows. Here in this chart, we can see how amongst all the commissions in Western Europe, by genre, public broadcasters contribute the most to the children's genres. So whereas, for example, if we look at all the commissions in reality television, public broadcasters only commission about 25% of those. And we've seen really that public broadcasters continue to invest about 5 to 6% of their commissions every year in children's content. Having said all this, subscription video on demand is, of course, it continues to be the main story impacting the children's content market. Globally, SVOD has now overtaken linear viewing as the main mode of content consumption in terms of the time we spend with it, as evidenced by this chart. But equally, this chart does not even include all the other video-on-demand consumption modes, such as catch-up services and AVOD, which are really starting to take off as well. In terms of volume of content, we see the number of children's TV shows and movies available in different regions really continue to take off. We have over 9,000 distinct TV shows and movies available for children in Western Europe and over 6,000 in the US. So what this means, of course, from the content creator's perspective, is that in this very crowded market where we have dozens and dozens of ways of accessing children's content, there's a far higher risk for content to be overlooked or quickly forgotten. Equally, in Western Europe, when we look at the catalogs of the main streaming services, yes, US content is not the dominant one anymore since 2022. So having decreased to 33% of the catalogs. Western European content produced in the main 5 markets is gaining share. And obviously also content quotas are helping to support this. But we also see content from other regions continue and becoming more and more of a competition for European content. And these pressures are translating also into an increasing rise of commissioning based on pre-existing intellectual property. Here we're looking at public service broadcasters and the commissions they have made for first-time new shows for kids over the last 3 years. And we see how essentially the rate of shows based on pre-existing intellectual property has doubled, from 23% reaching 43% this year. A lot of this content is based on book adaptations, movie adaptations, but we also see an increasing number of spin-offs. Spin-offs now making up the main share of content that is based on pre-existing IP. So this sort of is to show how even within commissioners that are providing this level of stability, there's really this need to offer increasingly familiar brands in order to stand out in this deluge of volume of children's content. And while producers may develop content that taps into familiar content and also shows that have the potential to be turned into a whole world of spin-offs around strong concept and brand, there are also a number of distribution strategies that they could turn to. And in this last section of the presentation, I'll look at what our data indicates from a distribution perspective. So Ampere tracks the popularity of individual shows across platforms through a bespoke metric that serves the sort of proxy for title engagement and success. And what we have found is that in Western European markets, in the key ones, children's content that was distributed on just one platform, regardless what type of platform, was the least popular. Whereas children's content available on 2 platforms was a little bit more popular, and the trend continues. And the more platforms content was available on, the more popular it became. This trend was also noticed across different markets. Here we're looking at UK, Germany. Similarly, in the US, we have a very strong correlation between popularity of content and the number of platforms that it's available on. A different way of looking at it here is, let's break the content available by type of distribution. For example, paid streaming, linear, free streaming, so titles that were exclusively available on just one distribution type, which are here represented in pink, and then content in blue, where we had a multi-distribution strategy across different types of distribution. The highest volume of titles was on exclusive platforms. So here, paid streaming and linear, with over 2,000 titles available just on paid streaming, so SVOD here. But once we look at popularity metrics, these pink exclusive categories that were dominant go to the bottom of the chart. So linear, paid streaming, free streaming, all having the lowest popularity rating, whereas the other categories where there was multi-distribution strategies had higher popularity ratings. And the highest of all was content distributed across paid and free and linear streaming. Similarly, when we look at, when we remove from our results the most popular titles who have very high popularity ratings that might slightly skew the results, and just look at sort of a more medium popularity type of title, a very similar result came out that the least popular was linear-only distribution. And compared to the average popularity rating, there was an uplift in popularity with multi-distribution strategies. So to conclude, maybe this is the sort of main takeaway slide, if there's one to remember from this presentation, which is this chart showing how exclusive titles and non-exclusive titles compare when we're talking about new shows that have launched between 2020 and 2022. We compared the progression of the popularity over time by number of months since their initial release. And we see that exclusive titles benefit from a higher popularity to start with, often helped by quite significant marketing investments. But these exclusive titles struggle to maintain a popularity level. They lose in popularity very quickly, and eventually we see the curve having a downward trend over time. Whereas in pink, non-exclusive titles benefit from the sort of constant re-release, appearing again on different platforms, and in doing so, they manage to gain in popularity over time, and to at least maintain popularity, if not slightly gain in popularity. So in the context of a rapidly changing content landscape, with fewer projects commissioned and increasing challenges to stand out among all the volume of content, new children content is more likely to benefit long-term from a multi-platform distribution strategy that can help to gain more engagement and popularity. Thanks very much for your time, and all these slides are available to download if you scan this QR code. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello.
Hi.
So I feel thoroughly depressed now.
Oh,
that
please
the
stop.
trends have gone down, and when can it go back up and all of that. But my question is, what research have you done around trends of subject matters of children's content, whether it be educational, entertainment? Have you done anything around genres?
Yeah, I mean, so what we do in our teams, we track the commissions, including the sort of thematic subject matter, or like a summary of each project. So we do have that kind of data. It's quite a long conversation to go into it here, but we are seeing, I mean, it is difficult to answer this question directly now, like how these subject matters are evolving. We do have this data. We can discuss it in more detail if you want afterwards. But in a nutshell, with the level of animations going down, we see a lot more live action projects being commissioned than animations. And this also obviously impacts on the type or subject matter slightly, so to speak. So yeah, but we can continue this conversation later. I don't have the data here, like on the subject matter specifically, but we do have it in our subscription package.
When you say platforms, multi-platforms make things more popular, are you just talking about kind of TV shows, or does that also include things like games and apps and all of those kind of things?
No, it is like, so the whole presentation, maybe I should have explained that more clearly at the beginning. So the whole presentation refers to TV shows, and in a couple of slides we also have reference to kids' movies content. But yeah, it is all like content that is for the TV channels and the streaming services. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much for your time this morning. I'll hand over to my friend Luca.